let's talk about Billy Idol. This is his album Cyberpunk from 1993. I'm not really a big fan of Billy Idol. He strikes me as the sort of person who plays music not so much for the love of music, but because it gets him laid. But Cyberpunk from 1993 is one of his most sincere works, and ironically also one of the worst albums ever released. I'm not just saying that with hyperbole. It is regarded as the album that nearly killed Billy Idol's career and as one of the most ill-conceived albums ever released. Back in 1993, Billy Idol was living a life of excess as a rock star. He got into a frightening motorcycle accident and was hospitalized and had all sorts of metal shit implanted into his legs. And a journalist popped in and said, "Hey, you're kind of a cyberpunk now since you've got all those mechanical bits in your legs." And Billy Idol just went, "That's not a bad idea." And remember, this is 1993, so the internet is a brand new thing. It's one that offers Billy a newfound opportunity to revitalize his music, or so he thinks. And computer software, music software in 1993 has just barely cracked the user-friendliness threshold. So now Billy and his guitar player, armed with Pro Tools in Billy Idol's personal Macintosh computer, set about to create Cyberpunk, the musical definition of the subculture that really didn't want to be defined. But damn it, if Billy wasn't gonna do it anyway. And, well, to their credit, end up producing and releasing a record created mainly on Billy Idol's home computer. There are a lot of stories to be told about Cyberpunk, most of them not by Billy Idol himself, because he seems to prefer that people would just rather forget about this album. In fact, he went on a 13-year hiatus following the release of this album. It was that bad, and he has never performed any of their songs in concert except for the single Shot to the System. But boy, that didn't stop the cyberculture of the early 90s from having things to say about this album, such as "What a Poser," and he's co-opting the cyber movement, and even William Gibson, arguably the father of cyberpunk, who by the way has a song named after his most famous book on this record. There's a fucking song called Neuromancer on this record. William Gibson has gone on record saying that he doesn't think Billy Idol actually read Neuromancer. When Billy Idol was doing press tours for Cyberpunk, he insisted that all the journalists that interviewed him should read Neuromancer. And when they did, and then, granted interviews, it was quickly very obvious that Billy hadn't read it himself. Now, Billy hasn't said that, and I couldn't find a quote of an actual journalist saying that they sort of caught Billy Idol in not having read Neuromancer, but William Gibson said that. And William Gibson seemed more amused than disturbed by this album, but boy, did the cyberculture of the early 90s, they did not have any of this. They would not. And Billy Idol even went on Usenet and the Well and these like proto message boards of the early internet to explain and defend and trying to interact with fans of the early 90s, and kudos for that, I guess. And was met with pretty much open hostility. But anyway, his idea for the album was to bring back a sort of DIY punk spirit in that he could write and record the whole album on his home computer, and by and large he did that. He just happened to do that and brand the album in such a way that it pretty much alienated all of his existing fans and all of the fans he hoped to attract with the album. I'm not going to go into any more detail because Todd in the Shadows actually did a whole episode on this album and what a glorious blunder it was. But man, if he didn't try. So this could just be one person's cocaine-fueled excursion into a world he didn't quite understand but really wanted to. The record itself doesn't really seem to have much to do with cyberpunk when you start reading the lyric sheet, which, by the way, looks like somebody's kid went loose and wild with a very early version of Photoshop and just basically vomited colors and fonts all over it. Look, every song on the lyric sheet is written in a different font, some of it quite illegible. And the album cover just pretty much speaks for itself, doesn't it? But I had to pick this up just because of the wow factor of it. And because as much shit as everyone gave this album, and some of it deservedly so, it's also kind of a cult classic album. There is nothing that says 1993 more than this fucking cover. And the music on the record isn't actually that bad. It sounds very early 90s and lyrically has absolutely nothing to do with cyberpunk or cyberculture or even computers that much, really. All the songs are about I'm off to the wasteland, I have no religion, there's a shock to the system, the LA riots were kind of fun, weren't they? That's a misstep and a half, by the way. There's a song called Power Junkie, but it's pretty much just about how many drugs he wants to do. And the song Neuromancer just seems to be using various words he must have picked up from Usenet or whatever, and just sort of mangles them into... The lyrics are shit, is what I'm saying, and have very little to do with cyberpunk. But boy, the music itself is like very early 90s techno beaty kind of thing with some really heavy guitars on it, and it sounds pretty good. The first half of the record does, anyway. Side A is my favorite. Then you get to side B with the aforementioned cover by the Velvet Underground, Heroin, and everything after that is kind of a blur to me. I don't think I've listened to it more than once, and it's very, very forgettable. But boy, does this album start out, well, kind of good, actually, in a schlocky, kitschy kind of way. And you feel kind of bad for saying that because, like I said, Billy was very sincere about this. He was very much into it, and he really thought he was onto something. And maybe he was. Maybe he was just a couple of years early on this, because it's pretty much just what happens if you take Billy Idol's brand of family-friendly stadium punk or rock music and just throw a lot of samples and techno beats into it. So it's a lovely album, and I have one other Billy Idol record. I have Whiplash Smile, and I don't know where I got it from. I think it was just handed to me, like one of those, here's a Billy Idol record, put that on your shelf. But this one I gladly paid money for. Now this, by the way, is the Italian version. It was released, this is back in 1993, so different regions of the world had their own releases of the album. I got this fairly cheap because I think it used to belong to an Italian radio station. There's a stamp there, which I think is the Italian radio station. It's also on the label of the record itself, and it's not in the best condition or anything, but boy oh boy, it's fucking cyberpunk. And the European version of the album, the standard European version, actually goes for about like 50, 60 euros usually. This one I got fairly cheap because of its condition and all. It's quite a long album, and they crammed a shitload of stuff onto a single disc, and they all sort of crammed that into one disc, so the sound fidelity is not the best it could have been. But there actually was a double vinyl release of this in Brazil. For some reason, when Cyberpunk was released on vinyl in Brazil, they printed it on a double vinyl. And I kind of want to get that, but then again, I do have this rule: why would I have two versions of the same album if not for a very, very good reason? And having Cyberpunk on a double vinyl is almost, but not quite a good enough reason to do it. It does not come with any of the fun stuff that the CD version of the album came with. There was a floppy disk included with the CD version of this, which had lyrics and a couple of essays, I think, and some really dodgy 90s graphics. But then again, dodgy 90s graphics is what we're all about with this album. So no, it didn't come with the floppy disk, but it's Cyberpunk, very much ironically on a very analog format, and you gotta love it. I do anyway. So here's to you, Billy Idol, you fucking weirdo. Cheers.